Yeah, sure.
Starting with the personal.
Yes,
How is
exactly.
Stefan doing?
Yeah.
Oh, he's doing well. It's been a full week. I've been on a business trip, a few hours away from my home, so I just came back on Friday afternoon
Hmm.
to see my family again, which is always heartening, and it's a delight to have those kids around. Um, but yeah, so I've been lecturing the whole week in asylum law, in my federal office, trying to teach new colleagues in the stuff that we're working with. So that's been pretty intense.
Do you by the way sneak in some Goethe while you're lecturing about asylum laws or not?
What I did, I sneaked in some narrative storytelling while I was relating to Lord of the Rings and the Fellowship of the Rings.
Uh,
Because I said the colleagues, they will be interviewing applicants for asylum, and they will have to listen to a lot of stories, and those stories can be quite harsh. And so I basically said, what you need to build is relationships in your office to have
mm,
a fellowship of the ring,
mm,
because you can't wait for supervision in like half a year or a year, but you have to do it right now. And so it's not Aragorn waiting for Eowyn sometime in the unknown future, but he has Boromir and Frodo and all the others in that situation, in that moment, and they share it. And you need to do that too if you want to get out of this job healthy. So
mm.
that was basically me trying to set them into a story. So in
Right.
a sense, so in a sense,
That's
this little
great.
corner is constantly in, in the back of my mind, part of the consciousness Congress.
Yeah. That's great. That's well put.
But overall, you're feeling how are you feeling? You feeling good?
A bit tired actually,
Yeah.
but not so much about it's not this physical tiredness. It's more like the week was just so jam packed with, deep, insightful content and working with a really tough topic.
Yeah.
Uh, it's like, how do you educate people in trying to decide over the stories of people applying for asylum?
Hmm.
It's like, how do you deal with, tough refugee stories?
Yeah.
And so we always, I mean, we did a lot of casework examples, and then you draw from your own experience, and then you recall, okay, I listened to this like victim of torture, or there was this woman, she was raped and she told her story, that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And so this can go under your skin,
Yeah.
and so you have to develop certain, Viveki would probably say, psychotechnologies to work with those narratives in a way that you don't become the narrative itself.
Yeah. I understand. I can only imagine. First listening, and then second actually experiencing something that horrible.
Yeah.
I can imagine that drains some energy. What about Alan? Alan, I think Alan is finally, for the first time in his life, a little rested.
No, that's not true,
He FaceTimed me today, and I looked at his face. I was like, "You look fresh, son."
but yeah, I slept in this morning and I
Uh,
hadn't eaten in a while. So, and that's a good sign if you get to do that. And no, last week was the last week of teaching. I think like now I'm not teaching for another month or so until I'm teaching again, and then I'm only teaching like 1 day a week. But the last um block of courses, I basically had to teach. Well, I taught on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So it's just like that. You're just always like thinking ahead to like the next class you need to teach, especially because some of them were multiple on 1 day. Um, and then on the weekend, like you kind of relax, but not really. It's more like you need it as opposed to like, like calm. It's like, no, no, okay, I need to relax now. And then, okay, and now the Monday is coming again and it all needs to starts over again. And I'm like, it's not like I'm on vacation or anything. Like now I need to start grading, but I can do that from let's say, the comfort of being at home. And yeah, I don't know, like this last block was really, it was quite wonderful, all the different courses. Yeah, like lots to think about too. Like, you know, like I've been teaching like lots of um postmodern and Marxist and feminist theories too. So like that always is an interesting point to like reflect upon how I integrate that with regards to like my own orientation. So
Mm.
that's
Yeah.
actually nice. Like it's like, you know, because I don't feel like it's, I don't know, propagandistic or something like that. It depends on how you communicate that, right? Like I think for all of those texts, like if you communicate that with like, let's say, like a resentment, like, okay, you know, like let's say, for instance, like you do a feminist text, you do it like with resentment to masculinity, like that's problematic, you know. But you can do it in a different way that's actually that helps me to inform my own stance, and then and as I said, integrate that. So that and there's precisely a difference in teaching that, you know, and just reading through it and
Yeah,
forming an
totally.
opinion about
Right,
it. So,
right.
and you know that probably very well, Stefan. So
It's I
yeah,
mean it's kind of non-judgmental opponent processing
right, exactly.
that you're constantly doing. And there's this it's so interesting because there's a strong element of translation involved in that,
Hmm.
and it begins the moment that you voice what you're trying to teach,
Hmm.
and that message leaves you and it has to, you know, somehow enter the other,
Hmm. Right.
and you
Yeah.
just don't know how it will be perceived.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, and you also know that it won't be fully perceived by everyone. So it's like it's like
Yes.
this double thing, right? So
Yes.
like because like first of all, like visually, like you can just tell that some students, like, I don't know, they're hungover or they're like behind their laptops or phones or something like that, and then others are paying attention, but you're not sure if they're getting it. So like, so there's this landscape that you're like, okay, I'm not sure what's gonna land, but I'm just kind of like gonna drop a lot of stuff, and then I'll kind of see. But I don't know, like the last week is always super nice because well, I mean, like I always get like lots of compliments from the students saying like how much they
Mm.
enjoyed it and
Mm.
how much they value the classes. And so like it's also been like a wholesome week, and that I think definitely helped out with relaxing. And I think specifically like one reason why you saw me rested, Lucas, is also like that you know, that it was like Friday afternoon, and then I got your message that you were gonna watch Dune with your fiance, and then I was like, oh, okay, so now now we're not gonna watch it with Lucas and Jules anymore. So like, okay, so what should we do then? Oh, should we just watch it this afternoon? Like, I'm free. Okay. So like then I called Madeleine and she came to town. And then we watched it in the cinema. And that really felt like, ah, and I can actually watch it and actually feel relaxed now. Like I don't have to work necessarily the next day. And then during the next day, like we just went cycling through just the countryside. So that was also really wonderful. And I think also like on the Friday evening we watched a football match. Like, by the way, we're playing Germany on Tuesday. I'm not sure if you know, Stefan,
Yes.
but
Yes. I mean, yesterday was just a wonderful evening because finally the German soccer players seem to get it back together again.
which is precisely the wrong timing for us. No, just kidding. It's just
Oh, well, it's just a few. I think it's a little more than 80 days till the
yeah,
championship, European
yeah, exactly,
Championship,
exactly. And it will
Germany.
be in
So
Germany. Are you going to any of the?
no, 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 no.
No,
I'll be
like
watching it at home with my family, and yeah,
yeah, exactly. It's just fun in that way. And then like today we just had a nice day, and like she's been out visiting her grandpa, who's unfortunately quite sick. But that's also been good, and we had some moments to catch up on that. So I don't know, like it's just I felt like I was able to focus on more aspects of life besides just all this like intellectual stuff that informs my teaching
yeah,
most.
that's very important.
Yeah, so
Like this grounding.
yeah, it's
I
great.
think interesting. See, cinema used to be this kind of,
Mm.
grounding thing for my wife and I before we
Oh
had
yeah,
kids.
I can imagine actually.
We were like cineasts. We went to
Mm,
movies like every month,
that's
and
great.
we love just going there and watching the movies and talking about them. And
Mm.
that, of course, I mean, if you have 3 kids, you have a lot of time constraints. So
Yeah,
it
right.
was already a very precious moment that we were able to go to watch Dune 2 for
Yeah,
such a, I mean, that movie is so long.
exactly. Yeah.
So it was like, thanks to the blessings of my grandparents, not my grandparents, but my parents-in-law. That's it.
Right.
My parents-in-law, and they just stepped in and said, "Okay, we're fine. We'll take care of the kids." And so
Wow.
we did that. And interestingly, we always did that with like the real big movies, like Villeneuve or Nolan.
Yeah.
It's like basically the last 10 years we went to Interstellar, and we watched Blade Runner 2049, and we went to
That's
Oppenheimer.
one of my favorite movies, like Blade Runner 2049, but that's besides the point for now. Yeah.
It is phenomenal. It's just the whole scenery and just the storytelling is phenomenal. And so basically it's like, if we watched movies the last years in the
Mm.
cinema, it was always either by Christopher Nolan
Yeah. Right.
or it was by Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, like some people made this
So
comment.
interesting.
There was the, what do you call it? Like there was the movie star, like the big actor who was really the big pull for many of these movies. And you have some of them still, but it was like, you know, you had all the Will Smith movies and you had all the, well, you still do to some extent, like Tom Cruise movies and like those types of actors who were just really big, and movies would revolve around them, and movie goers would revolve around them. And I do feel like maybe it's just with the, you know, the internet and that people read reviews and that, but now they're just like, oh, the new director movie, like, oh, this director is out with a new movie and it's
Mhm.
like a new Christopher Nolan movie. And that's also makes sense because obviously there's more consistency between the movies of a director than there is between the movies of an actor, because they can often obviously
Yeah.
also quite bad movies.
I mean,
But
in a sense, it's always been both and. If you look to the early 90s, it was like, okay, Steven Spielberg, he's got the
right,
next movie.
yeah, right.
It was like,
That
okay, wow, he did Hook, and then suddenly comes around the corner with Saving Private Ryan
yeah.
or The Schindler's List. It's like, wow, okay, what is he doing there? And then you have Martin Scorsese. I mean, he's been doing that for like decades.
Yeah, he's still doing it, which is wild. Like that's
Right, right.
yeah, that's correct. Though I haven't yet seen the new one. But yeah, I'm actually curious. Like, so I really want to know, like, what did you both think about Dune the second part? If that's okay, if that's an okay topic for
That's
you.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
I'll start with my experience of it. I had a lot of moments of goosebumps and like awe, but I didn't cry. And to me, that's very telling. I had
Ah.
a, I had a feeling that, and my fiance shared this idea that it definitely lacked something for me, the story. But cinematically, it reminded me of the movie you just mentioned, Blade Runner.
Mhm.
Where it's like cinematically, I think it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Just for the images, so beautiful. But the main thing I felt was that it lacked some element of transcendence or love. It seemed like a war movie in some ways, and that was very epic, like really epic when you see Paul Atreides do the speech in the middle of millions of Fremen. Sorry for people that don't know or haven't watched the movie, but
Oh, by the way, we have to decide whether or not we're gonna add spoilers in this in this
Can
talk.
can you
I
do a
don't think.
conversation without spoilers?
That's a
Yeah,
good question. Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
you
know.
know, we'll mention it. We'll mention the spoiler alert when
Sure.
we do the story topic that is like, okay, that's actually a spoiler. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
the main feeling I have is that it was like very powerful,
Hmm.
but it didn't touch my heart. So that that's my initial comments. Stefan can take it from there if he likes.
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday evening we watched Wonka with the kids, and
Timothy Chalamet again.
again, Timothée Chalamet, right? And he's just such a versatile actor. It's wonderful to see. But you're totally right. I don't recall that I was in tears while watching Dune 2. I was in awe, and it was just overwhelming at times what was presented there. It felt so visceral. So afterwards, I watched a lot of documentary about how they did that, and it's just insane. It's just wonderful to see that finally someone gets it, that we don't want CGI, but we want the real grist and we want to get into the details of it. Just like, Charlton Heston, Ben-Hur, and, all those, the Ten Commandments, those old movies. They
Yeah.
did it, yeah. And basically Villeneuve is recovering that and rediscovering how to do that for the modern cinema. And so I do feel that it's kind of a watershed moment for modern movies, because you've had those superhero Marvel franchise movies, and they've all been utterly, full of CGI. I mean, they've been massively successful on an economic scale, but artistically, it's kind of not where cinema was supposed to be heading towards, in my opinion. And so in that sense, Villeneuve's movie is really, a beacon of light when it comes to artistic and poetic filming and storytelling. But I didn't feel the emotional grip that I had while watching Wonka, interestingly. There's this one scene where Wonka opens the chocolate of his mother, his deceased mother, and it basically says, it's not about the chocolate, but it's about the people you share it with. And sitting there with my kids, that had me up in tears, because that was just such a powerful moment for me. And so I looked back at Dune 2, and it was like, I do have to admit that that movie kept me thinking for days. So it definitely had a big impact on me and my wife, and we've been talking about that ever since. And I've been watching documentaries and re-listening to the Audible book of the first Dune book as well, and then trying to get into all the details of the fan lore around that. And so it's interesting to see that this movie, the first one and the second one, really kind of piqued my interest and had my interest ever since. So there are a lot of themes running underneath it that I think are, profoundly relevant to today in many ways. And I really appreciate Paul van der Klay, touching that issue as well and going into the Damien Walter stuff, and that was just so on time. And I got a lot from that as well. But yeah, it's also, I think, if I recall back to the Blade Runner 2049, that was also more of this awe, quite indifference to the Ridley Scott from the 80s. Because I mean, if you watch Rutger Hauer's final moments on the roof in the rain, and that doesn't get you, I don't know what will. Right? Yeah, so that's my first thoughts on Dune 2.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm actually in large agreement with, by the way, I would say like Blade Runner 2049 in some sense, it did have that notions of like saving the father from the belly of the whale, that like you have like the what do you call it, the Harrison Ford character, and then you like he goes there. So like I do feel like there was something emotional and like a traditional storytelling kind of aspect there. But I nonetheless see your point, and I think, by the way, this it's so sad actually, because I love Denis Villeneuve. I'm like, oh my God, he's such a great like new still director. But I do feel like he gets the emotional stuff. Like he doesn't nail it, you know what I mean? Like it's like I'm never like exactly like which you mentioned is that I'm rarely like so fully gripped by that. But at the same time, like he does do enough of it that I'm like, it's not like I'm not invested at all in his character. So like there's this difficulty there. But I really like, Lucas, you sent me like a short message where you said like, okay, I experienced like the beautiful, but I'm not sure about the true and the good. And like I read that to Madeleine, and she was like, hey, he seems like he had the same impression of the movie as you did in some sense. So that's really funny because we didn't talk about it amongst ourselves. But I absolutely like, I was so amazed by the movie, but also like so disturbed by so many things, but not in a sense like this is a bad movie, but just like I felt bad vibes watching like so much of it. But that was like, but again, like not because it was bad or something like that. Just that I was like, this is, I think, in some sense, a very nihilistic movie. Like that is just like, okay, you have all these competing forces, and none of it is actually like it's like they're just like competing, and then maybe there's one one saving grace kind of figure, and he can transcend that. But I think it's already being foreshadowed, right? That Paul is not going to be the hero you like you're looking for. So like I don't think that's too much of a spoiler to say. So like there's and yeah, I don't know, like, and then I was comparing it to for me, Lord of the Rings is still, because like it's both books and it's a movie, and for me that's really the golden standard of, let's say, the best blockbuster movies I've ever seen. That in terms of like, so like I think there's better movies than Lord of the Rings, but just in terms of like a blockbuster movie like that gets everyone to the theater and won all the Oscars, I'm like for me it doesn't top that quite easily. So I'm really impressed by that. But then I also like, okay, but I get something different out of that than I do out of this movie. But I'm like, maybe like that is just the fact that I'm looking for like implicitly just like this Christian storyline in the movie. And that actually, so part of me was also like disturbed by the fact like, okay, so many people enjoy this. And I enjoy it too. So like, I would go to Dune Part 3 if it comes out. But I'm like, but actually there's something just like, I don't know, off about the storyline. So I'm not criticizing Denis Villeneuve. And I'm not even criticizing Frank Herbert necessarily, because again, like it made sense, it was coherent, but I don't know. There's something about it that I don't doesn't feel right, and that has this kind of like Marxist understanding too of, even though he was, I think, a Republican kind of figure like Frank Herbert, but it has this Marxist understanding almost of like religion. It's like a toolkit that you control the masses by it, but also not completely. So it's not like he completely caricatures it, but it is definitely this like external perspective on religion, and it has like the call out to the Monty Python speech, like, oh, like he doesn't think he's the Messiah, so he must be the Messiah, which is
Yeah.
also really funny. But I'm just saying, like, it does have this like external perspective on religion as opposed to like this, internal experience of the transcendence. And I think Paul van der Kley also summarized it well. It was like that in Tolkien, in the world itself, that's the story. And in Dune, like there is stories and they compete
Yeah.
amongst each other, and that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I feel very similarly when I discussed it with Jules. She also felt there was something off
Mm,
in almost all aspects, and especially the religious. It bothered me a bit, where it did feel like he just doesn't understand it. I know also that partially these books were based on his experiences with psilocybin, and I listened to a talk with Karen and Brad, and Brad spoke about Dune and the Lord of the Rings as well, and he paralleled Dune with Explicit and Lord of the Rings with Implicit
Yes.
knowing in a way. And that really resonated with me when I listened to the talk and then seeing the movie. It was like, oh yeah, that really hit it home for me. It's really like more of an explicit display. Um,
By the way, if I can add to that
yeah,
precisely, like also because I felt that in Dune, and he does so very well, but it's like these are the challenges of our time. So like we have environmentalism and we have colonialism and we have, world wars, and those are all like in the movie. But that's it, it's kind of like that's it. And then like in mythologized form, as opposed to like where I feel like, okay, but let's look at like the more perennial patterns that like go that actually like, go forward, like, like so far in time and go backward so far in time. So just to add to that, like that explicit and implicit
yeah.
difference.
And
One
then
thing,
that's a
but
very specific take of Villeneuve on Dune 2. I mean, it fits into our current time. Sorry, but I mean, he said that in several interviews that he wanted to exaggerate certain points because he believed that Frank Herbert would have wanted that as well. Because Frank Herbert himself was quite disappointed with the reactions to Dune, and so he wrote Dune Messiah to actually show that it's like a story that how messianic faith goes wrong.
Mhm.
But what I found striking both in the book and in the movie, it's even more obvious, especially if you listen to the Chakopsa language. Um, that idiom basically is like Spanish and Arabic, mixed together. And so the the criticism of religion is basically a criticism of fundamentalist versions of Islam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's reduced to that. If you look at the books, it's the Butlerian jihad, it's the jihad of the Fremen. The movie speaks of the holy war, but if you look to the original source, it's all about this jihadi notion of religion. And so, in a sense, I wonder whether that was actually the intention of Frank Herbert, because if you look at several, important figures of the story of Dune, the first book, it's basically Jessica and Chani both giving themselves out of love for something. Yeah. And I mean, Chani dies at the birth of their twins. Jessica undergoes this, horrific transformation to become the mother of the Fremen, and she had Paul because of her love for Leto.
Mhm.
She explicitly declined what she would have had to do because of the Bene Gesserit,
Mhm.
out of love. And Paul does not consummate his marriage to later on to Irulan out of love for Chani. Now he keeps a chaste marriage with her. And if you look even further, if you look at Leto II, the son of Paul and Chani, who then sacrifices himself basically by becoming this monstrous mixture of a sandworm and a human.
So this was a spoiler for everyone.
Okay, yeah, that's for, but that basically is also a very Christian motif, because he saw that there was this golden path towards, and he had to sacrifice himself for humanity to be able to go onto that path.
Hmm.
And so, in a sense, I wonder whether Frank Herbert really was so nihilist, or basically was also swimming in this kind of,
Yeah,
Tom Holland Christianity that he just couldn't get out of.
right. It's also like there's this really strong tension in him that like it's not so obvious, because otherwise also the movie would have failed. Like if it was like
Yeah.
hardcore anti something, it would have been like, okay, clearly like, this is just propaganda. But that's the strength I think of Frank Herbert, is right. It is very nuanced. Like that you do feel like, okay, there's something to be said for it and against it, and
Yes. Yes.
it's kind of like that. So I do appreciate that in some sense. And I did read like one quote that he had on religion, that he says like, even though I don't like this metaphor at all, but it fits with Dune, I guess. He said, mine religion for the good that it has, and get rid of what is bad at it. But then he says like, don't criticize people who need it, but also be very careful with those who become fanatics, like religious fanatics, like and so in some sense I generally agree, obviously, because like that's I guess what we're trying to do here right now, is like we're trying to discuss like what is the good of religion that yeah we should keep. And at the same time it does feel again like this, what do you call it, like this social engineering kind of risk, like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
we need to preserve this but get rid of this, and I don't know, like, so, but those are some nice aspects, and I'm really curious to see. I did hear like that later on in his life he became like an anarchist, and I'm curious like if that is because, like anarchism can be because of nihilism, can be like just don't believe in anything and more, or precisely because like, oh, I no longer find my, like my hope in the state, and I'm looking elsewhere for, and so I'm really curious how that ties into it. But again, like just like you, I've been thinking about it and reading up on some stuff in the past few days, and for me that was just since Friday. So I've informed myself on some aspects, but I'm really curious to read more. Like, yeah, and obviously it was super interesting that Tolkien himself did not like the books. That he was just like, I dislike it with some intensity, but I won't comment on it because it wouldn't be fair because we're competing authors.
Yeah.
But that's so interesting. Yeah.
I saw that there wasn't any mention of God in the movie, which it it kind of felt like you center around the prophet or the Messiah,
Mhm.
and there's no mention of the God to which the Messiah is responsible.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. And that,
and that
go
you
ahead.
see, you see it,
Yeah,
in Paul, and he becomes an idol in a sense. I think
absolutized. Like,
Yeah.
absolutized. Yeah,
just like, oh man, like there's so much to talk about because Lucas has been talking to all these great guests, and I want to talk about DC Schindler, and don't like only like devote yourself absolutely to that which is in fact absolute or something like that. But
yeah.
uh, what I was gonna say about this, like, yeah, because obviously, like the Bene Gesserit, like they have some control of everything, like, right, like they control the fate. Like,
yeah.
it's insane, right? Like they can control the extent to which, people centuries later like believe in something, and at the same time, like they're like, okay, spoiler alert again, their plan goes wrong. Like that's made very clear in the movie and in the book. That's like, oh no, we didn't expect this. So then you'd hope, like that would be again, I guess, like the Christian presuppositions in my movie watching or book reading experience is like, oh, that apparently there is a transcendent ethic to which it is like subordinate, but that's not made clear at all. It's just like, oh no, you tried something, just competing force, and then like there are more competing forces, and sorry, it doesn't always work your way. That's kind of like the extent that I got out of it. And that's also why, look, like the evil in the book, and I think that's what Herbert is going for, so that I also compliment him on it. But like, which is done so well as well in the movie that you actually felt like, oh my God, like this villain, like that he ends up fighting at the end was so evil. But at the same time, it's made relative because you don't fully vouch for him too. It's not like you're like, oh my God, it's like Lord of the Rings against what do you call
Yeah.
it, Mordor.
Yeah.
But then I also like. I am kind of thinking like, okay, am I just like, like this would be like the Marxist criticism of myself. It's like, am I just like a child? Am I like infantile that I want, good and evil, and I want it to be clear, like, so I'm still thinking about it for that reason so much.
I mean, it's a perennial question basically, but it's also, it doesn't, you don't get out of that question just by stating that it doesn't exist.
Exactly, yeah.
That's a simplistic move.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we've learned anything, it's that those moves don't, they don't suffice any longer. There might have been a time where you could try that, but it doesn't help any longer. And so in a sense, I think it's really interesting that you see actually that, and he works that very well in the book as well. It's like the Bene Gesserit, they are trying to control everything,
Mm-hmm.
down to the genetics, down to the individual decisions of who has which children, which is like very invasive. And
Yeah.
they never really state why they want that. It's basically they want it because they can. And they want to keep the control of whatever comes out of that. And it's it's undermined by love. Because Jessica doesn't care about the Bene Gesserit plan, but
Mm.
it says, I love my husband. On it's not even her husband, but I mean, it's it's her lord, and they love each other, and so they have Paul because they wanted to have that, and because out of that act of love, all the plans of the Bene Gesserit derail.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a sense, you could basically say,
Mm-hmm.
don't try to control religion the way the Bene Gesserit do, because if you try to do that, love will always make you fail.
Right. Yeah.
And that is, I mean, if that isn't a Christian story, I don't know what is. It's like,
Yeah. No, okay, you are completely right actually, and thank you for helping me see this because I definitely didn't appreciate this aspect enough about the movie. But I would say like that, from ideally like that type of Christian storytelling, you would add on top of that like, oh, like that's, you have a ladder of love, and that's
yeah,
like, oh, that's love there on the micro scale, and you can then see how that sort of stacks up and builds up to like, oh, so it's like love transcendent, like, and agapic love, and not just
yeah,
love.
yeah. And I
But
mean, you see that in part as well in the reaction of Paul after he duels Jameis
mm,
in the first part of the movie.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
even there's like he shares his tears. He sheds his tears. It's like that's a holy act
Mm-hmm.
of reverence in the Fremen, and he does that, and that's basically showing love in this foreign situation to him.
Yeah.
And there's another interesting critique actually, and you could say that Paul being the Muad'Dib, um, the Lisan al-Gaib, doesn't work out exactly because of the lack of transcendence,
Yeah.
because it's a bottom-up messianic figure. It's not top-down messianic. So
Mm-hmm.
if there were like at the top of her ladder something that would, grant him the power to be the messianic figure and lead the people as they
Yeah.
need to, that might show something. but instead it's just both the. I mean, you see that especially in the second movie. It's like, okay, the Fremen, they want to have the Lisan al Gaib, and you have this Monty Python moment there, of course. um, and
Yeah.
at the same time, the Bene Gesserit, basically, even though they call it abhorrent that Jessica decided otherwise, and contrary to their plans, they want him to be the Kwisatz Haderach because they want to keep the control. And
Yeah.
at least they know Jessica and they know Paul and they know they're on Arrakis in those dire situations, and they've planted on Arrakis their story to keep the control and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah, and like I would say, by the way, like that's one way in which it is hopeful, and like obviously like Frank Herbert, like he wanted to exactly like show that the messianic figure, like be very careful with that. But especially like I think this is a really profound observation that you made just now, because this ties into, let's say, the concern that many of, like, let's say, the conspiracy theorists have, right? Like that we have these figures in politics, but they're not actually there like through their own doing. They're there because there's like a shadow elite behind them who put them there, and they're being controlled by them. You know, it's like that's the exact same structure that we get with the Bene Gesserit. Like it's not actually, and it is actually in some sense nice to see that play out and see it fail miserably, right? So like, so let's say that even if the like, so either the conspiracy theorists are wrong and we have nothing to worry about, or to some extent they're right. And obviously, like in some ways, they necessarily have to be, because this happens continuously throughout history. That you have these types of, you know, behind the scenes like elites also working, and it's hopeful that that doesn't work. You know, that it's like, okay, that might work very temporarily, and then you'll see actually how awful that gets, and that's at the same time that's obviously not hopeful, because you know, like, okay, that means the deaths of millions or more, you know, but okay, in the end, something else will prevail, because this is just not the answer. But that then again doesn't get developed in the story, so we just see what doesn't work.
yeah, not in the movie.
Yeah, well, right.
Certainly.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So here's something that I mean, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but the transformation scenes of both Paul and of Jessica,
Hmm.
I found they lacked a lot of detail that you had in the book,
Hmm.
because there Frank Herbert goes much more into the detail of what happens inside of them while they're partaking of this water of life.
Yeah.
And I was basically kind of expecting something in a sense of, you know, this stream of consciousness movie making, like the beginning of Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, something like that, you know, just a lot of imagery and changes of that imagery in very fast speed, and, you know, maybe the music playing out to just kind of try to show, not to tell, what is happening inside of Paul. And it was really reduced to just a few short moments, but they are probably the most important moments of both Jessica and Paul, because from then on he has prescience.
Hmm. That's great, actually. Like I hadn't thought about that possibility, but now you mentioned like that connection with the Tree of Life, which I mean, the lacking connection specifically. It's like that would have been like a super, I think, effective move, like to tell it through those images, because like also some of like the best shows or other movies that I've watched that didn't feel like indeed telling about that, but just like to show like through all those memories, and to some sense, like, because they appeal to me personally. It's not just that I'm like, okay, oh, now I get to know this character better. It's actually that I then start to reflect like, oh yeah, that is strange when let's say when you're 20 years old, for instance, and you reflect back on when you were 6 years old, and it's like, yeah, whoa, that's so strange. And then you see that in that character, and then you do that on yourself. That's like, whoa, okay. So like it immediately makes it so much more alive. And I definitely felt like, and I already told this, like, because we watched part one like a couple of weeks ago, okay, like, oh, we rewatched it to like prepare for this. And I was like, yeah, I just don't. I cared more than the second movie, but then obviously like we also have the degradation. But in the first movie, I didn't care at all. That was just like all these characters, I don't know, they're not that interesting to me, even though they had more time in the first movie to deal with them than they did in the second movie. So it's kind of strange how that develops. But I guess, you know, you have the first movie already as a starter, so there's more you can do in the second movie. But yeah, great. Lucas, like, what do you think besides like after all this?
About Dune.
Yeah, like I'm just curious because like maybe it would be nice also to like connect this maybe to some of the conversations you've had, for instance, because like you've had so many, and I've had the what do you call it? Like I've had the advantage and the blessing to be able to listen to some of them in the past few days now that I don't need to constantly prepare for all my classes. So I'm curious what you think, and then maybe also more in
Yeah.
general, because I didn't even ask you, how are you doing and what the hell are you doing with your channel, like growing it like this immensely
Yeah,
lately?
we can segue over there. My last thoughts about the movie. I like that you pulled up the first movie because I also rewatched it recently.
Mm.
And Jules, my fiance, mentioned that in the first movie you have Leto and you have who's the Aquaman
Oh yeah, like
Duncan,
what's
Idaho.
Duncan Idaho, that's it, yes.
they are both much warmer, you know, that you get this, you know, Leto has he says he doesn't believe in revenge, or Jessica says that in the second movie. And really that really misses for me. I missed that in the second movie. Even the mom is such a masculine figure, you know. So it felt really cold in that sense. And
Mm.
yeah, I think that's the main overarching thing for this movie. It's really awe-inspiring, but not necessarily in a good way. It reminded me actually when we went to see Jordan Peterson, and he talks about the Bible, and it's inspiring, and then he starts to talk about his political things,
Hmm.
and you see people rile up with the spirit of Cain.
Yeah.
And I felt this goosebumps. I was sitting down, and we were not like clapping along because we
We
felt
we don't mean positive goosebumps here. We were
no.
very
It's like
yes.
whoa, and that's
Yeah.
that's a lot what I felt in the movie. Like whoa, the magnitude of this, and then also
Yeah.
kind of worrying, like you said, that people enjoy this, but
Yeah.
maybe they do more than enjoy this. Maybe this riles them up because there's wars going on, you know.
Yeah,
And this
exactly.
is like that spirit of Mars and Seth, or
Yeah, I was like so sometimes if you look at, for instance, like these great things which like China is capable of, like where they have like all these people and they all, what do you call it, like they have these huge marches,
yeah.
like that you're like, whoa, that's so impressive. But like it's not like you feel like emotionally dragged about
No.
it, or you feel kind of scary even that it's
Yeah, it's terrifying.
like too impressive. Like, why would you want people to go through this? You know, like I didn't have that with Denis Villeneuve. Like, I do feel like they really enjoyed making this movie, but still, like, it's yeah. Oh my God.
Just one last observation there. It's if you look at the if you look at House Harkonnen, House Atreides, and then Fremen,
Mm.
2 out of 3 of those movements are collectivist cultures. The
Yeah,
Atreides are the only one that show the individuals.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
And
that's great.
so, I mean, I don't know what to make of that, but it's interesting that you have like the embodiment of evil
Yeah,
as a collectivist culture and the embodiment of religious fanaticism also being the embodiment of the collectivist culture.
That's a
and
good observation. Yeah.
yeah, but I like I agree. And one thing I would make of that, and that's kind of like my concern, is that obviously Frank Herbert had an idea in mind, which was indeed to show the dangers of the messianic figure. So he also, like I'm not sure. Either you have to have watched the Joker movie, like the relatively new one, like a couple years ago, or Taxi Driver, and then you know what happened when you follow a character and you kind of like get invested into their lives, and then spoiler alert, at some point they make this shift and you're like, whoa, they're actually evil. And it's like, oh my God, like, but now I invested in their lives and this is terrible now. And I do think that that's kind of what annoys me about that, is that Atreides culture, he also used it to set up us liking the Atreides more than, for instance, all the other empires, to then show like, ha, gotcha. You shouldn't like them more because they also like, that's at least my concern. But yeah, I do agree like that is interesting. Hmm. Lucas.
Okay, we close it here. Dune 2, finished chapter. I'm excited for the third one though.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wanted to talk about
Well, there's so much,
the talks
like
that have been
it's
happening.
crazy. Like you've been so I'm not sure like what you were able to watch. Well, there's a couple of things. Like outside of your channel, I'm really interested in what's happening in, let's say, the work of Brandon Graham Dempsey, like
Yeah.
what he's doing with the meta modern spirituality thing, talking to Jordan Hall, talking to Paul van der Klei, and really trying to say like, isn't Christianity like going too much like, let's say, the nostalgia route, like all these recent conversions, as opposed to really dealing with the complexities of this time. And I don't think I don't fully disagree with this criticism, but I think it's interesting and it's worth talking about. But then within your channel, like, oh my goodness, like you've been talking about Karen's life story. I, by the way, also thought your podcast with Brad was very interesting. I was able to listen to that too, like about the stories. Then obviously talking to Robert Breedlove, who I actually also like really enjoyed that conversation, even though I rarely listen to his own output, but I do feel like he has like some interesting thoughts in this matter. And then obviously Kurt, which was very interesting to me, like because even though like I do still some of things like his thoughts are still a bit messy, and obviously it's very interesting that he would say that you know what was it like that mathematics grounds him, and I think he was aware of the irony in saying that, but still like you know he is the type of figure who is grounded by mathematics. And then you talking to DC Schindler, and can I? Yeah, well, it's probably already out at the point this is released. Like, and then you're talking to Ken Lowry, so it's like you're doing crazy things. So what the hell are you up to, and what are your impressions of all of these things? I'm curious, and then I'm also curious to hear Stefan's response to some of these. Maybe he got
Yeah.
to. Out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a coincidence, to be honest. I don't seek out these bigger guests as much, nor do I feel that those conversations are more important than the one that we're having right now. I do like to reach out to people that have inspired me, and some of them have bigger channels, some smaller. But honestly, it's more of a coincidence that it's all back to back to back right now. Um, because, for example, Schindler, I scheduled it like 2 months ago, but it happened to be in March, and then Kurt was a slow ride because Kurt, I just wanted to speak to Kurt because Kurt, I think, needs more grounding conversations.
Yes.
And from what I've seen from him online as well, is that um, I think he struggles in some ways personally as well, and with people that he's been involved with. Um,
You know, one thing that I was thinking about when listening to Kurt, because he also said, and that's actually a positive thing, his wife, for instance, also grounds him. And I was like, that
yeah,
sounds very
yeah,
healthy. But
yeah,
I was also concerned, like, what if something happens to his wife? You know, like I was like,
yeah,
you know, like, oh my God. But like, hopefully, like his wife is healthy and all of that is good. But I was
yeah,
like, that would be terrible for him. Like, because like if I listen, like more, like worse for him than it would be for some of us, even though obviously, like, we love our significant others. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it was
yeah.
so, yeah,
How big of a person it
yeah.
is. Yeah, and so Kurt, I was just in personal, more in personal contact with on Twitter DM before that. Um, yeah, because I generally I feel like he's such an authentic and beautiful person that
Mhm.
I just wanted to, yeah, to speak to him really. I said I'm open to just having an offline Zoom conversation because he doesn't like to be interviewed very much.
Mhm.
He's made clear before in the past. So I proposed both options, and then he said if you could send me what kind of questions you would like to ask, and I discussed this with you as well. What is wisdom here? Um, but yeah, that turned out to be a really fun, and he's very gracious. Like he put clips of me on his channel, calling me an Egyptologist, which I'm not, which is pretty funny. but um, but yeah, so that what am I doing with all of this? Yeah, so I guess it's more of a coincidence. Robert, I know personally. I do a bit of work with him. I book some of his guests, um, and I've been following his channel for years. So this was just like, can I talk with you for a bit? Um, it is public that Robert. So I'm not saying anything I'm not allowed to share, but he made public on Twitter that his mother passed away recently. In that conversation, I would have preferred to go more personal because it was very his ideas crystallized, and a lot of that I was already familiar with. So you didn't hear a lot from me because I was just it was more for the people, I guess. It felt more
Yeah,
like
like
a
I think you for your audience, such as myself, it was interesting to hear some of these.
yeah, exactly. But I think he knew I knew most of this stuff already from him because I've been following his work for a while.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it's mostly just been a blessing, especially well, actually all of them. But I was just surprised with these big thinkers
Yeah. And DC
how
Schindler, Ken Lowry, like
yeah, incredible how incredible they are in real life, how well, real life, real digital life, how gracious they are and how present they are. The same with John Vervaeke, and yeah, I'm excited to share also the Ken interview. I had him earlier this afternoon. It went really well. I'll be appearing on his channel as well. But yeah, that's what's going on. I'm not trying to build anything or whatever. I also want to just get back to conversations with people that haven't appeared as much online at all. Um, because I think, like I said before, those might be equally or even more important for this channel's purposes, because I'm not trying to grow something gigantic with this. But yeah, that's what I'll lead off with.
I still think like Paul van der Kley is such a good model for this, is that he's just like, he talks to more famous folks
Yeah,
every then, but like he really it's not about that. Like, and
yeah.
that's very um I'm not sure what of all this that was mentioned you got to watch. Maybe you were also very busy, clearly, Stefan, so I'm curious or what are your impressions of what Lucas had just said?
Well, first of all, I can only speak to a little of this because when I listen to things like the conversations, the act of translation, and not the act of translating it from English to German, something like that, but the act of trying to really come to grips with what I'm listening to,
Mm.
for me takes such a long time that I don't really feel confident to say something that would do any justice, because each and every one of those individuals is just phenomenal, and every conversation has, huge value and benefit, that it's difficult to like really point it and reduce it to something. It's more kind of a holistic experience that I'm having while listening to that stuff.
Mhm.
And so what I can say is I listened very closely to the conversation you had with Karen Wong,
Mm.
because somehow her life story got me really involved in listening. And I had this kind of experience that kind of sidelined some of the experiences that I had in my life. And so that was really, really interesting. I haven't had the time yet to listen to your conversation with Kurt, but I did listen to a conversation of Kurt with Jesse Michaels recently on the theory of everything.
Mm.
And that was like this 1.5 hour conversation about how does Kurt tackle questions in general and AI and God, and it's really basically about everything, including UFOs. And so that was really a fun ride to listen to, but I couldn't really pin it to like one sentence why I felt that it was interesting.
Mm.
It just piqued my interest enough to listen to it like for 1.5 hours.
Mm.
Apart from that, I really find uh, it's so wonderful to see that you take the time listening to or talking to some rather strange fellows and do that for like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you meet a stranger on short note, you say, well, let's do a conversation, and then something develops out of that. So that speaks a lot about how you approach conversations in general, and how you, just by having that open stance, already create surplus value for everyone listening.
Mm.
And so, in a sense, I've never experienced you as really someone trying to consciously build this in such a way that you make that kind of profile. So I don't know why that is, but I think that you're really authentic compared to some other podcasters that try to be prolific about what they do. And so there seems to be kind of, maybe we have this ability in this corner to differentiate, to call out someone when he's just prolific.
Mm.
Mhm.
Because there again, Paul van der Kley, he's the role model for that. And he facilitates conversations and relations that are authentic, at least to my observation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some people might see it as, we are also just basically playing with our profile. And H.G. Muller would probably say, even though you say you don't have a profile, that already makes you prolific.
Mhm.
But that's to me, it's like, it's so nihilist. In
Yeah.
the end, it's a deeply nihilist notion that is solipsistic, and just I can't attend to that thought very long.
Yeah, that's kind of like what sorry, just to now tie it back to Dune, but to some of the understandings like that, it's like, you kind of, you could do like a Hegelian or Marxist reading that is like, precisely the moment when he is their hero, he becomes the villain, or precisely the moment when he embraces the good, it's actually evil, or precisely the moment when you become evil, there's some good in it. So it's like they like those paradoxes, but not, like in Zen koans or in some of the understandings of Christianity, or like the Trinity, like they can, like those paradoxes can, help you transcend to like an increased understanding. But now it's just like, it's just that, as opposed to like, and then it doesn't help you rise above that. But I do, yeah. So
And
yeah.
isn't that the essence of metamodernism?
Mhm. It
I
was,
listened to several episodes of Paul Anleitner, and he was talking about metamodernism there.
yeah,
And
yeah,
basically, he
yeah,
says this. There's one explanation he has is, or rather, example is like sincere irony.
yeah. That's correct. That's correct.
And I
Yes.
was, and that reminded me of another movie. I thought that Barbie was the ultimate meta-modern movie.
I think Paul Enleitner has also suggested in his videos about it that Barbie might be like the new meta modern masterpiece.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Uh, so that's actually not a very strange connection that you're pulling. Like I like personally, okay, so again, like people differ about this. I don't think Barbie was pulled off that well, but I see how other people could think that's the case, and that's so like for me a better example that Paul Antleitner also gives himself. And it's kind of funny, like because I anticipated it. I tweeted at him like, "Are you going to talk about this one?" He was like, you're spoiling it," because it was like what's like Into the Spider-Verse, the kind of like animated
Mhm.
Spider-Man movies recently, because they have this understanding, and Jonathan Peugeot has also been talking about them. But it's like, they're fully postmodern in the sense like, it's literally a multiverse. So there's not just one story, there is tons of stories. And it's like, so like you could be nihilistic about that. And then what shows up in there is that actually there is still apparently in all of that irony and all of that funny stuff, like, so you have all the postmodern elements. Some essence does show up again, and that makes it like modern again, but it's like not modernistic in the traditional sense. It's like meta modern because it goes through a postmodern period. So in that sense, metamodernism can be an answer, but I do think, like there, for me the problem is again like there, it's like it's epistemic, and it's much less related to, like, let's say participatory knowledge. Like I don't see um how they're grappling with, okay, but how do we live this? It's more like, okay, if we look at a piece of art, is it meta modern, yes or no? Like, does it contain both of these elements? And now this individual is interested, Brandon Graham Dempsey, in, do these recent conversions, and there's so many of them, right? Like in sense, like you have Ayan here, Sia Lee, and then you have Jordan Hall, and then he even listed Shia LaBeouf, like just to some
Yeah.
extent you can add those two, especially because apparently Shia LaBeouf was considered himself to be meta modern, so that's kind of interesting. And then you have a bunch more. So like you have what's his name, like from the Evolve Move play, Rafe Kelly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So like so you have a bunch of individuals who now are converting to Christianity, and he was like, but this is not meta modern. It's just them going back into, like, let's say, a traditional framework. And he strongly believes that that's not sufficient to tackle these challenges right now. Um, so, but I'm not sure if his solution is actually like, so now I listen to it, and there's also something off about that, but he is willing to talk. And I appreciate that, like, so he's still developing his ideas about it, even though he also has books out. So I guess there are stakes for him too, like that he's kind of like defending something.
But isn't the metaverse thing basically something that Leibniz already proposed?
Yes, that you could say that to some extent. Like, I mean, Leibniz also anticipated Einstein, right? Like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
time and space are just relative, like to each observer. So like, there's something to be said for that too. But yeah, you're right. Like, it is true.
And I mean, I don't know if it. I just bought this like old book by, I think it's a Dutch fellow, Leroy Lumpke.
Mm.
Um, Hans Rookmaker recommended it in the What is Reality lecture
Oh,
that you can find on the Anadromist, and I've been doing that for several years now. I've listened to Rookmaker I don't know how many times now, and I've got the book. I've read that several times, and I've been trying to pick up the threads that Rookmaker throws and just get those books, and it's insane. It's just amazing. And
Yeah.
Leroy Lemke, he basically proposes that Leibniz offers the solution for the polarity of imperfection and perfection, the tension between those two poles in modern thinking. And he says Leibniz invented progress, the idea of progress.
Tell
Which,
me. Tell
which
me more. I'm really curious.
I don't,
Like,
I haven't gone any further yet, but that's just basically the hypothesis that he proposes in that book.
yeah.
And I
Okay.
don't know how he works that out, but that's the idea. And you could say that maybe I'm pushing that too far already, but it's like, okay, if you don't solve it to one of the poles, today what you have in meta-modernism is exactly that. Yeah, not resolving it to one of
Exactly. Yeah.
which might be something very good. And I'm totally for, the idea of Viveki, the tonus.
Yeah.
And you know me, Goethe,
Component processing.
right? Yeah, and so I don't know if that's a bad idea actually, but we've been so infused with the idea that progress is something very modern, and when I come to think of progress, it's basically like, okay, Marxism, something like that, yeah. But maybe we have to look a few hundred years back already to find that beneath all those ideas, all those frames, was the idea of, or the desire of Leibniz to try to solve that tension with something that could be a real synthesis and make it progress. And progress doesn't need to have a telos. And in many movies, you see that, especially in I think some of the franchise movies, you see that it's just change for the sake of change. It's development for the sake of development, not that it leads to something. And I think especially that was it at the end of I don't know. No. I don't recall. But one of the later Marvel movies, you had the ending, and it was so soaked with this idea that it's just, things change, and we have to all, embrace the change and the development. And if you just believe in yourself, it's not about you believing in yourself to become something, but to constantly keep on becoming without ever getting anywhere. And that might be part of the problem we have today, because in the end, if your identity is rooted in only this process of progress, you're left with the question that has always troubled humanity: where do we come from and where do we go to?
It's so funny, like exactly like we go back to Heraclitus with change and becoming, to Parmenides who's being, and everything is static and in some sense, and just like the change is an illusion, and for for Heraclitus permanence is the illusion, and then obviously like Plato, who reconciles the two, that it's like change is of the sensory world, right? Like that's the world we live in, but permanence actually in the world of the eidos, and not the idols but the eidos, like right, like the spectrualities, like that, where the good and the true and the beautiful subside. So like, and that dimension is, let's say, civilizationally lost to us. So obviously it makes sense also that we would go back to our understanding as like fundamentally embracing change, right? Like it's like it's not clear that we believe in essences anymore. So
just as a funny anecdote, the first time I came in contact with the word eidos was computer games. Because
wow.
Eidos was the studio that brought out Tomb Raider.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I want to know what that connection is all
Me
about.
playing Tomb Raider in the 90s, and just late 90s, and the starting screen is like Eidos. It's like, okay, interesting.
Yeah, oh my God. Oh man, yeah, like I mean, I said the Greek word because I purposely, like, I don't want to say either ideas or forms, because both of them are like, a
Yeah.
bit You're complicating the understanding. You've probably been reading a lot of Plato, like in preparation for DC Schindler or not, Lucas?
Well, I read Decision. I always read Plato pretty much. Whenever I'm at work, I always have my colleagues know I always have Plato open. So I'm always reading a bit of Plato all the time. But for DC Schindler, I just read his own book, the highlights I made, especially. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah,
You pulled up some great quotes. I'm really curious for you to see it, Stefan. It was literally a nice conversation, and also just like I really like that you add the personal elements to it, that you ask about their own lives, and it was also like obviously when he spoke about his childhood and like him with his dad, I was like, hey, that's so funny. That's like the exact same
yeah. His
that
dad is also a theologian. For
yeah, exactly.
context, yeah,
But also specifically that it tied more specifically to you because, for instance, like I didn't have those Sunday sessions with him, but or with my dad, but you did. So it's
yeah,
like that parallel sort of worked out, and then obviously you mentioned it, and that just put a smile on my face. I was like, yeah,
yeah,
great.
yeah.
That's really
David is great.
I was also like, I was talking to like Madeleine asked me because she saw me smiling while I was listening. So you're like, why are you smiling? I was like, well, it's just Lucas is talking to one of the most important Catholic philosophers at the moment. And so she was also like, what? Why? And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll have to explain this a little bit. But
Yeah,
it's just hilarious and strange and amazing at the same time.
yeah. Well, I would say that that book left a mark on me even before I knew that David was in the corner. I
Mm,
think he wasn't even when I read it because it was 2 years ago that I read his book.
mm,
And I'd read all of Plato when I was 19. And when I read his book, I realized like how stupid I've been for interpreting it the way I did. Because his book is about the Republic, Plato's critique of impure reason. And it completely opened up Plato for me, where now everything I read again is like reading something wholly different. So
yeah, it's
now
strange.
having him in the corner is really cool. And Ken, to his credit, can take a lot of credit for that because he's done many conversations with them and he's brought them together with John and with Jonathan. And those are some of my favorite corner conversations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the recent conversation about AI was excellent.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
But I somehow felt that I don't know if you had the similar experience, but I thought, okay, Viveki starts with, kind of summarizing his essay.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Um, and then Peugeot steps in. And then somehow it was like, okay, and now we have DC Schindler. And I felt he had a hard time actually, being able to get into the conversation the same way that Viveki and Peugeot had done already because they had been in contact before that
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they had interactions there. And so it was like, yeah, it was kind of not disappointing for me, but I felt DC Schindler wasn't given as much justice as would have been possible in maybe slightly different setting of a conversation for him.
Yeah.
Well, I also think like he has less like because I recognize this because I'm here as my capacity as like like from a philosophical domain, and then I like it's like so I also listen to some of these conversations. So especially like when I listen to, for instance, Karen Wong, or when I listen to Kurt, both people that I really admire and love and appreciate, but at the same time, like like they're all over the place and they know it, like they're aware of it. They're all over the place in the sense like they're combining, like then science and then to philosophy and then to religion and then to spirituality. And the thing is, John has made it his life's work to do so very carefully and rigorously, but he does so too. So like he also goes all the ways. And then Jonathan Peugeot doesn't do so all the ways, but he knows how to sort of reach into that a little bit to kind of tie people to him. And then DC Schindler is just talking from his own expertise. So he's not used to going in, I understand why, like to going into cognitive science and all that. So I also understand why that's the case.
Yeah. I would say speaking to David, what he does with his way of thinking is like a topic will come to him or he thinks the topic is important and he's like, oh, okay, now it's time to really think about that. Then he thinks about that for a year and he writes a book about it.
Yeah.
So I don't think AI is one of those examples yet. Um, whereas Jonathan spent a lot of time on AI for a while when no one was really talking about it, I think, like a year or two ago. And then John really got into it more recently. And he, of course, wrote the Mentoring the Machines. Um,
By the way, like when I re-listened to some of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis episodes, I did notice like he is already talking about it then. So like he said
Yeah.
like, wait, this is a huge concern, you know, like, and then he goes on. So it's like
Yeah.
it's clear that it was already in his thinking, but he really formalized it in that video essay for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Any place you guys want to take this conversation before we finish?
Oh, that's a good question because that's the thing. Like that's why I felt so. Should say it like I mean I think we're all tired and we all have a work, you know, like but
Context, it's like 10:42 p.m. in the evening.
yeah. Um, and tomorrow is a Monday, so
Yeah,
yeah, that
exactly.
Right.
that too. And no, but like there's just basically too much because like we could focus on one of those conversations,
Yeah,
or maybe one
Yeah.
tangent in one of those
Yeah.
conversations would be amazing. I
yeah.
would say like one thing that I appreciated just to maybe to end it on a personal note, which I also said I think in a comment to the conversation with D. Schindler, and that was really like, you know, we always talk about these things like, okay, do they make sense, yes or no? And I really appreciated when you said like, yeah, but you know, you mentioned like D. Schindler actually thinks we have to go back to going to church in some sense, like that authority in that sense is important. You mentioned that in the conversation, and then you said like, okay, but what do you think then about the John Vervaeke practices? You know, like because you're friends with him, and then it was like, well, it's like, you know, we're gonna have to see how that pans out, but mostly I trust him. It's like, and that was so beautiful to me that I was like, and I have that too with John, that I'm like, oh yeah, I trust him to do the right thing. Like if it doesn't work out, it'll become clear. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's precisely what we're doing in this little corner. Like we're building up trust amongst each other. And then maybe sometimes it isn't justified and then, you know, you don't fit into the corner. But essentially, if you're constantly opening yourself up for criticism, but not just criticism, like also like relationship, right? Like we build fellowship together. And then it's like, yeah, like do whatever, like go join whatever denomination you like, you know, you could be a Christian, you cannot be a Christian, but we basically trust you in some sense. And that's sort of this implicit ethic that is building underneath that. So I'm kind of curious to hear your reflections on that because I thought that was a beautiful comment by him. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it ties back to what I briefly sketched at the beginning of the conversation. What we are committed to is this act of translation
Mm-hmm.
in a way that we realize that whatever we say, we don't know how that, you know, is perceived. And it's always the sender receiver model problem around here.
Mm.
But at the same time, I have the feeling that we are building trust in that kind of translation.
Mm.
That if you say that he says what it is, I trust you to be correct on that. And I trust this community to call out anyone who's playing an unfair game about this. So basically, we are committed to, we judge them by their fruits. And the fruits are the result of a conscious act of trying to translate something that I have been thinking about, that others have been listening to, that someone has watched or read. And that already is very important just for the building community. Because that's another insane rabbit hole that you can go into. George Steiner.
Yeah.
Insane. After Babel, currently watching documentary, reading the book. It's amazing. But there he basically says that different languages maybe evolved because, you know, these groups did not want to have anyone in those groups. It's like in-group out-group behavior. And what we're currently doing is we're, you know, tearing down those walls by saying, yeah, I know we talk differently, I know we listen differently, but we still want to see each other in the eye and try to talk to each other, even if we are not sure that the translating act will be successful. But we put trust into that act because we trust the individuals on the other side of the wall that they will take up what we say and they will do something good out of it.
Yeah. Right.
I will say that was beautiful. I hope someone clips that. That was really nice.
Oh gosh.
That was really, really good. It really resonates
Let's
with me.
hope that Kurt clips it and puts it on his channel.
Egyptologist talks to Goethe scholar, talks to Nietzsche expert.
Yeah, exactly.
That is good, guys. Shall we finish this up?
Yeah.
Sure.
I would like to speak again because I feel like there's just too much to talk about. So I'm sad it's so short, but we'll keep emailing, keep trying to find holes in the
Yeah, we will.
schedules.
I mean, I was absolutely thrilled to see that this actually will happen again on short note.
Yeah,
I was like, my
exactly.
heart was thumping. I was like, yes,
Yes, exactly.
I can see the brothers again. Yes.
Yeah, this
But
is
that's so, like,
exactly.
it's so funny, right, Stefan? Because you have to imagine, like, I can talk to Lucas quite easily, and I see him on a somewhat regular basis, right? So it's like you're fulfilling a special role here, because we could technically, like, we could do without you, but apparently we really want you to be here, you know?
Yeah, you
So
add
there,
something for
So
sure.
Yeah.
if it's just me facilitating the conversation between two brothers, that's
yeah,
wonderful.
I don't like no, but like exactly like, but I don't know how you're facilitating it, but you're doing something very, yeah, very nice on top of it. So I really appreciate you
But
for
yeah,
that.
it's definitely not a just. I think you're very important to
Yeah.
this, and I really like the dynamic here.
Thank you. I really
Um,
appreciate that.
absolutely,
Because
guys.
you two guys, you've gone so much to my heart. It's wonderful to see that that is possible in this corner.
Likewise, feel the
Like
same way.
exactly.
Guys, let's hit the hay.
Thanks
Good
a
luck with your
Yeah,
work weeks.
until next time.
Sounds great.
Absolutely.
Bye bye.
All right, guys.
God bless.
Godspeed.
God bless you guys.
Bye.
Oh, Aaron, you coming to Easter?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I'll see you next week.
Have a
He's
wonderful
risen.
Easter with the
You too.
family.
You too. See you guys.
Bye bye.
Yes. Bye bye.